Hello, Podheads. Welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. This is your host for today, Kate Carter.
I'm Kylie Caldwell.
And I'm Holly Lamoureux.
And the gang is back together.
Boop, boop.
We have lives. It's fine. It's fine. And some of us have children, and that's fine. And some of us have dogs
Some of
and
us as in
cats.
one.
Us as in one.
Some of
And
us as in Kate.
it's just me, actually. It's just me. Okay, so we're gonna hop right in because I got a story for you guys today. So today we're going to talk about one of those cases that honestly feels like someone took a few different horror movies and smashed them together in one. And that's because there's absolutely no reason that all of these things should exist in a single case file. When people hear the name Daniel LaPlante, most of them think of one thing, the boy in the walls. Well, maybe that's because you've heard of the urban legend of this story, but over the years, it's kind of taken on a life of its own. You hear some people tell a variation of it online where they say a family started hearing noises in their house, objects started moving on their own, strange things began appearing, and then eventually a teenage boy was found secretly living inside their walls. And honestly, if that was the entire story, that alone would be enough for a full episode because that concept is pretty much nightmare fuel itself. The idea that someone could be inside your house, not just breaking into your house, but actually living there, moving around while you're sleeping, watching your family, eating your food, and hiding only inches away from you without you realizing, it's a good enough excuse for me to tell you to sell the house immediately and never emotionally recover. But in reality, what makes this case even more disturbing is that the wall story, which is what everybody seems to remember, isn't even close to being the worst part of this case. It feels like people accidentally remember just the first part and forget the rest, because what began as a bizarre stalking and psychological terror eventually escalated into one of the most brutal family murder cases in Massachusetts. And by the end of this story, I think you're going to understand why people still talk about Daniel LaPlante almost 40 years later. All right, podheads, let's get started. All right, so let's go back to the beginning because this case does require some context. We're going to be talking about Daniel Joseph LaPlante. He was born on May 15th, 1970, and he grew up in a town called Townsend, Massachusetts. If you've ever been to that area, you picture like a quiet New England town where everybody knows their neighbors, kids are riding bikes, and everybody just kind of assumes they know everybody else's business. Townsend isn't like Boston. It's not like some big city where people felt anonymous. It's the kind of town where if something strange happened, word traveled quickly. And when people later looked back at Daniel, they were able to start piecing together memories and saying things like, yeah, something was a little off about him. I do want to be careful here, though, because a lot of true crime stories have this bad habit of, maybe adding facts or rewriting history after everything's done. Whenever somebody commits some horrible crime, suddenly it's like every classmate from kindergarten comes out, like on the documentaries where it's like, his cousin was my best friend in second grade kind of situation. And you're like, all right, so that's how we're here. But people are always like, oh, we knew something was wrong with that person, or, we knew Daniel was messed up, but nobody ever like did anything about it. But Daniel's childhood really did appear to have some deeply chaotic and troubling all along, and way before this case took place. Later reports, though, and testimonies suggest that Daniel had experienced severe abuse growing up. Daniel himself would even claim that he had been physically, emotionally, and sexually abused by adults in his life, including allegations involving his father and stepfather. Talk about the mom being a shitty picker. Some of the specifics vary depending on the source and what came directly from Daniel years later, but almost every account, I'll say, agrees on one thing. Daniel's home life growing up was very unstable, it was very traumatic, and it was very violent. And again, I think it's important to say this because sometimes people hear childhood trauma and immediately think like, oh, we're building an excuse for, people like Daniel and what they did. Plenty of people are able to survive horrific childhoods and do not become a person like Daniel LaPlante. Let me just say that. But if we're trying to understand who somebody was and how they became the way that they became, we do have to talk about that growth and the environment that they came from because, as we all know, human beings don't just like they aren't born evil, It's how they're raised in the environment that they grew up in. But by all accounts, don't get me wrong, Daniel struggled pretty early on. He reportedly had dyslexia and learning difficulties, and so he had a hard time in school academically growing up. Socially, things weren't that much better for him either. He didn't really fit in well, and classmates later described him as awkward, isolated, and strange. Multiple people remembered him as somebody who seemed pretty uncomfortable in his own skin. He never quite knew how to interact with people in a normal way, so he was just always off. He was like that weird kid in the hallway. There are some reports from former classmates saying that he could become intensely fixated on people or situations, and others described him as having this ability to make people feel uneasy, even if they couldn't like articulate why. And honestly, those descriptions are interesting because they weren't necessarily saying he was a violent person by any means. They weren't like, red flags or triggers for someone becoming a murderer. Like Daniel didn't grow up killing animals, Like that's like the first step that we see a lot is that if you're going to kill humans, you start with animals. But Daniel wasn't like that. People just remembered having this unsettling feeling when being around him, which is kind of, I mean, that's a red flag. But like, I don't know if I would be like murderer, or lock him up in a mental hospital or something. Okay, so as Daniel got older, concerns about his behavior apparently started increasing. There were some juvenile issues. He started having theft allegations, behavioral problems, and had lots of interactions with mental health professionals, so we love that. But one thing investigators would later notice is that when they looked back through Daniel's history was that the more serious crimes that Daniel like committed, he had this pattern of invading spaces, which is going to make sense in a minute. It sounds like a weird thing to say, but stay with me on this. It's going to become important later on. Some people commit crimes for money. They steal TV, jewelry, cash, things that they can sell. Daniel's behavior often seemed less about taking things and more about entering other people's spaces. He wanted access to them. He wanted to be close to them, proximity wise. He wanted to be inside spaces where he didn't belong at all. And when you look at everything that happened afterwards, that pattern started feeling very significant. By 1986, Daniel's now 16 years old, and this is when he started to become fixated on a teenage girl named Tina Bowen. Accounts kind of vary a little bit on the nature of their relationship because some things that I found, like some sources, say they dated briefly, while others suggest that like they barely knew each other and Daniel probably just exaggerated parts of the story later on. But either way, what seems clear is that Tina did not view their interaction whatsoever as serious, and at some point she made it very clear to Daniel that she wasn't interested. And for teenagers, rejection is embarrassing and painful for a while, but eventually, like life moves on. But Daniel did not move on. Instead, he became increasingly focused on Tina and eventually on Tina's entire family. Before Daniel was known as the boy in the walls, before he became a teenager whose crime would make national headlines, there was a girl who entered his life, Tina. Tina wasn't some just random side character. She was a 15-year-old living in a town called East Pepperdale, Massachusetts, which is near Townsend. And she was just a girl trying to survive a very difficult season of her life before Daniel ever entered it. Unfortunately, Tina and her family had already been through something devastating. Tina's mother had recently died of cancer, leaving Tina and her younger sister Karen and their father Frank trying to figure out what normal looked like. Mr. Bowen, Frank, had suddenly become a widower with two teenage girls, and according to later accounts, he had to work multiple jobs and long hours just to keep things together financially. Tina was grieving, her younger sister Karen was grieving, and the Bowen home had already had like this heavy feeling hanging over it. And then Daniel appeared. Daniel was around Tina's age, a year older, and one day he called and asked her out. Now, that's one of the strange things about this case is because there wasn't some romance. They didn't know each other. There wasn't like a friendship or relationship. They weren't high school sweethearts or anything. It was a one-time thing. Daniel called Tina and asked her out on a date, and Tina agreed. That was it. Because remember, we're in the 1980s. Tina's 15 years old. There's no social media. There's no profile pictures, FaceTime, Googling, whatever. A boy calls her house, seems nice enough on the phone, maybe a little awkward, but harmless. And so Tina said yes. Like she didn't know him at all, just said yes. According to later reports, when Tina actually met Daniel in person for their date, she was completely shocked. Daniel had apparently misrepresented himself, so Tina was surprised by his appearance. Apparently, Daniel looked rough and dirty. Daniel already had a reputation around town as an odd and socially isolated kid, and so other people thought he was strange. Even adults thought something was off with him. So it was noted that Daniel had struggled with like personal hygiene, and he already had this reputation of having bizarre behavior. But whatever happened on Tina and Daniel's first date, the date night, obviously, like, Tina was not interested. And so she did not pursue a second date with Daniel. And like I said, most people take rejection and it hurts. But for Daniel, he didn't move on from it.
She
So
got catfished.
she got catfish before catfish was like a big thing, you know? But like you
Hmm.
don't know each other and someone just calls you and you're talking on the phone and then like he asks you out on a date. How did he get her phone number? How did he first realize who she was? Like I couldn't find any of that.
Phone books. I don't. Yeah, but then like, okay, he saw her out, knew what he looked
He
like, but
had
how
to.
did he know her
Yeah,
name and then had to look up
exactly. It's
creepy?
a fixation type of thing. He was able to, in some words, I would say stalk, and figure out who she was, where she lived, her phone number, blah, blah, blah. Like he knew what he was getting into. Tina did not. So, this is where the story starts to get a little weird because imagine for a second you're Tina's family and little things start happening around your house. At first, nothing dramatic. Maybe a photograph isn't where you left it. Somebody swears they put an object in one room and now it's in the other. Things disappear, turn up later, and family members start accusing each other of moving things. You know how, like, families do this thing where somebody loses something and immediately starts blaming everybody else, and then it just shows up. You'd probably just think that you or one of your family members was forgetful. But over time, the incidents became stranger. Family photos were reportedly appeared rearranged, objects were being moved in weird ways, sounds started coming from inside the walls, and there were stories later involving messages and strange displays around the house. Though over the years, this case became so almost heavily fabricated that, like, it was kind of hard to distinguish between like documents and records and sources from what has become like this urban legend as well. But what isn't disputed is that the Bowen family had become increasingly frightened because things kept happening in their house and nobody could explain why. And what sucks even more is that the family wasn't just dealing with one dramatic event. They had been experiencing weeks of tiny incidents that kind of slowly took over their reality. Like I'd be tripping out, you know? I'd be like, I swear, especially if it was happening every day, I'd be like, I swear I didn't do that. Like, I'd think it was me. I'd be like, my brain is gone.
I'm getting dementia or something.
Early onset, I'd go to the doctors. I'd be like, I have early onset dementia. Everybody in my family says they're not moving pictures, but the pictures are off the wall. Did I do this? Totally. While all these little things were taking place, Daniel LaPlante had secretly gained access to concealed areas inside the Bowen home. He wasn't just entering it, though, he was hiding there. He was living there. He was sleeping in the walls, and he was only a few feet away from the Bowen family. So, over the years, retellings of this story have turned part of this into an urban legend, and but online versions make it sound like Daniel had this like elaborate hidden apartment inside their home, which is not the case because that's not how houses are built. We aren't talking about some like giant attic with a mini fridge and sleeping bag. These were tight, dirty, uncomfortable spaces, like crawl spaces and shimmying against the inside of a wall because there's no room, like it's hidden sections where someone could conceal themselves and avoid being seen. But the more you think about the logistics of it, the weirder it becomes because you're talking about a teenage boy choosing to wedge himself into dark, insulated spaces for long, extended periods of time just so he could remain close to this family and watch them. Like
Oh, it's
to
weird, baby. I don't even have to think about him being a teenage boy. Like, this is strange.
I mean, granted, I feel like no, I was gonna say the older you get, the weirder it is, but actually, it's just fucking weird. Like,
Yeah.
think about what it actually entails. Like, it's not comfortable. There's no
Hmm.
bedroom, there's no bathroom, and there's no space to move around. He's surrounded by isolation, wood framing, dust, nails, heat trapped between the walls. I mean, total darkness. There's no light bulbs. Investigators later believe Daniel wasn't just simply hiding there briefly and leaving. He was staying there for stretches of time and coming out only when opportunities presented themselves. Reports suggested that he'd come out when people were asleep or away from the house. He would allegedly take food, move their belongings, and walk around the house himself, sitting on the couch. So while the Bowen family was going on about their normal life, like eating dinner, watching TV, sleeping, Daniel was only a few feet away from them the entire time.
Freaky.
And then one day, everything exploded. The Bowen family was at home when Tina's father, Daddy Frank Bowen, became suspicious again. Mr. Bowen had noticed additional disturbances that day and started checking around the house, fearing he had gone crazy. By this point, I feel like Mr. Bowen's instinct finally took over, and he was like, I know I'm not crazy, something's going on. So Mr. Bowen started looking around, and eventually he opened up a closet door. And standing inside the closet was Daniel LaPlante. Now,
Oh, creepy.
before I go further, I want everybody to picture this because the image itself is like infamous. Witnesses describe Daniel as looking almost unreal. Reports say that he had smeared substances all over his face, which was thought to be like ketchup and mayo, and that he was also armed with a hatchet. So imagine Mr. Bowen opening a closet door, expecting to find old coats or boxes or whatever, and instead finding a teenage boy standing there looking like he crawled out of a nightmare with an axe in his hand.
Wait, did you say with fucking condiments on his face?
Yes.
Wait, why?
Because he
Why?
would have, I guess he had been eating, like, maybe he was eating a ketchup and mayo sandwich or something, and there was stuff all over his face.
What? Okay.
I would piss my pants.
Can you, and like, he's all dirty because he's been in your walls.
He's just been pissing in the walls too.
I think I'd do like a swift punch and then close the doors and run.
How disrespectful, honestly.
How rude. Now, depending on the source, accounts differ slightly regarding exactly the sequence of events, but what we do know, what happened next, happened incredibly fast. So, at the shouting of her dad, Tina reportedly escaped through a second-story window and ran for help while Mr. Bowen attempted to protect the family from Daniel. The police were called, and when they arrived, they expected to be dealing with a dangerous intruder, but instead they found nothing. No one. Daniel had disappeared. In a quick moment between Mr. Bowen finding Daniel in the closet and yelling for his daughters to run, Daniel had made a bolt for it and ran out of Mr. Bowen's sight. Like, imagine being one of the officers responding to the scene that day. You have a terrified family insisting there's a teenage boy, deranged looking, inside their house. The family is hysterical, saying the kid had a weapon, and they're just trying to describe what they saw, but yet, when you search the residence, you initially come up with absolutely nothing. Not even evidence that an unwanted teenage boy is there, until the investigators discovered the hidden spaces. And once the police realized that Daniel had been concealing himself inside the structure of the home, the entire situation transformed. Because suddenly all of the strange events had made sense. The noises, the moved objects, the feeling that someone had been watching them. Now you'd think at this point, this is where Daniel LaPlante probably should have just disappeared into like the juvenile system or something. But let's review why we're already here. We have stalking behavior, unlawful entry, psychological terror, secret access to a family home. We have weapons and escalating conduct that had become increasingly disturbing to the Bowen family. Even if no one knew exactly what Daniel was capable of yet, this was definitely not normal teenage behavior. Like, you're weird, Daniel. You're weird. But this is like beyond weird. This has escalated to not okay. Red flags. Red flags. What makes this case so frustrating in hindsight is that many people later on would look back and see the Bowen incident as a giant, red flag, flash warning sign, but it never really received the level of attention it deserved because Daniel was arrested and then he was released. And after Daniel had gone missing from the Bowen's house, when Frank originally found him in the closet, a police search ensued, and eventually Daniel was found hiding in the nearby forest behind the house. Daniel was then charged in connection with the breaking and entering into homes and stalking and harassment behavior involving Tina and her family. But despite everything, he was released back on bail and out on the streets relatively quickly. Pause for a second. Who bailed him out? Who
That
done
was
bailed out Daniel? Because we know his family didn't because they were shitty. So like because I read a few things and I was like, he was released on bail. Who's paying for his bail? So at this time, Daniel still a teenager, but while he was in the jail, the juvenile area, there were psychological evaluations and multiple discussions about his mental state. Questions emerged about trauma, instability, behavioral problems, treatment, everything. Daniel himself reportedly claimed that he endured extensive abuse throughout his childhood, and professionals attempted to understand whether his actions stemmed from psychological trauma or deeper behavioral issues. I think the two go hand in hand, but I'm not a professional. And this is where the rabbit hole gets interesting because later psychiatric evaluations and court proceedings painted a very complicated picture. Daniel reportedly displayed manipulative behaviors, and experts struggled to determine exactly what they were dealing with. Some viewed him as severely traumatized. Others worried there were signs of much more serious personality issues, that had been developing underneath throughout the years. Years later, questions about Daniel's capacity for remorse and rehabilitation would continue following him all the way throughout adulthood. But in late 1987, none of that had been fully answered. Daniel was already out of the system, and within months, another family entered his orbit. Now enter the Gustafsons. So the Gustafsons were, by all accounts, a completely normal family living a completely normal life, which somehow makes what happened to them feel even heavier. There's a tendency in true crime to accidentally reduce victims to the family or the wife and children, especially once a case becomes famous because of the killer. But I really don't want to do that here because Priscilla Gustafson was a real person with a life that existed long before Daniel LaPlante ever entered it. Priscilla was 33 years old, she was a teacher, a mother, and at the time of her death, she was pregnant with her third child. Her husband, Andrew, worked hard. Their kids were all young, and by outward appearances, they were just living this kind of quiet suburban life that thousands of people around Massachusetts were living in the 1980s. The Gustafsons had two kids, 7-year-old Abigail and 5-year-old William. At some point before the event that we're going to talk about, Daniel had already burglarized the Gustafsons' home. That part is important because we know now it wasn't just a random selection. Daniel knew their home. He knew the layout of the home. He knew where their rooms were located and how the family moved through the space. Investigators later believed that Daniel had entered the house before and became familiar with it in the same way he had with Tina Bowen's home, although thankfully not to the same extent. But again, you see the same pattern that is emerging. Daniel wasn't just interested in stealing things and disappearing. He inserted himself into people's environments. He studied the people, he learned their routines, he liked to occupy spaces where he wasn't supposed to be. And something else was happening psychologically with Daniel during this period that becomes clearer the more you dig into court records and evaluation, because Daniel this time around was escalating and fast. There are reports that say after his release, he continued to commit burglaries and thefts and continued demonstrating increasingly erratic behavior. Investigators later learned that Daniel had obtained firearms and ammunition. How? Don't know, but who bailed him out? And one detail that comes up in court documents is especially chilling because prosecutors emphasized that Daniel had told them he was practicing loading and unloading the gun multiple times before this event occurred. Think about that for a second. This is not impulse curiosity, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we call preparation. Daniel was somebody who was rehearsing familiarity with a weapon. He was getting himself used to it. And one thing prosecutors later argued very strongly during trial was that Daniel had multiple opportunities to leave the Gustafsons' house before this event occurred. What mattered legally, because his defense would later attempt to argue, diminished capacity and psychological impairment, but the prosecution focused heavily on moments where Daniel made conscious decisions, basically. They argued again and again that Daniel could have left the situation and instead he chose not to, and it escalated. In reality, though, going back, Daniel had never actually one-on-one met the Gustafsons in any normal social sense. Like he targeted them during a string of burglaries he was doing in his hometown, and the Gustafsons just happened to live nearby. And Daniel had already broke through homes in their neighborhood after he was released on bail for the Tina Bowen family incident. According to court records, Daniel first broke into the Gustafson home on November 16th, 1987, weeks before the major event took place. During that particular burglary, he stole items, very random items, a cordless phone, some cable boxes, and some coins. Evidence later showed he hid some of that stolen property at his own home. So, unlike the Bowen family, Daniel became, with the Bowen family, Daniel became connected because he asked Tina Bowen out. The Gustafsons appeared to have simply just been random victims that he had selected during his burglary-like pattern. There was no evidence at all that he was friends with them or had any personal relationship with them beforehand. He seems to have become familiar with their house by casing and burglarizing it, and then returned later on to commit something much worse. So, December 1st, 1987, Daniel was 17 years old, started out as an ordinary day for the Gustafson family. And I think that's one of the cruelest things about family annihilation cases is because the victims don't really know that they're living their final hours of their lives. Like it's a normal day for them. Priscilla, in this case, was running errands. Her children were in and out of the house, and nothing about that day signaled what was about to happen. When Priscilla Gustafson pulled into her driveway that afternoon, there was absolutely no reason for her to believe that anything was wrong. And that's kind of one of the gnarly things about cases like this. We tend to think, terrible events announce themselves almost somehow. Like there's warning signs for the victims that danger, feels different when it's waiting for you and you're about to enter a situation. But for most people, tragedy arrives out of nowhere, like in a normal, ordinary day. In this case, Priscilla was 33 years old, pregnant with her third child, raising her two kids with her husband Andrew, and living by what all accounts say was a normal life. She was returning home after going to the grocery store, and she didn't believe she was entering a situation that was dangerous. But inside the Gustafson house, however, Daniel was already waiting. Court proceedings later on would establish that he had armed himself before the burglary and had brought that loaded firearm with him this time. What remains so significant about this period of the case is that Daniel later acknowledged that when he realized the family had returned home, apparently it was unexpected to him. He thought they weren't going to return home for a while. His first instinct was not violence, actually. Daniel had told investigators that he had considered escaping. He reportedly thought about leaving through a window. Investigators and prosecutors would later return to this point of the story because they viewed it as evidence that Daniel understood that alternatives existed in this situation. This wasn't a situation where he was immediately cornered and had no other options. There were moments inside Daniel's head that he knew he could have abandoned the house and fled, but instead he remained inside. As police reconstructed the events later on, they concluded that Daniel confronted Priscilla and her young son, William, after they had entered their home. Imagine the confusion and terror of that moment with Priscilla. One second you're returning home from a regular day, and next there's a teenage intruder standing inside your house with a gun. There's pretty much no time to process what was happening. The evidence presented at trial showed that Daniel had gained control of the situation by forcing Priscilla and William into a bedroom. William, who was only 5 years old at the time, was separated from his mother and placed in a closet, while Daniel had restrained Priscilla to her own bed. And this is where the timeline becomes especially important because the prosecution's theory of the case heavily relied on showing that events unfolded over a period of time rather than just one simple action. According to the evidence, Daniel had multiple opportunities to stop what was happening, but instead continued to escalate. So Priscilla was restrained on her own bed and then proceeded to be raped by Daniel. The details presented during this court painted a picture of prolonged and terrifying encounters, which Priscilla was effectively trapped inside her own bedroom, trying to protect herself and her child. One of the heartbreaking realities of family murder cases is that the victims are often forced to experience not only fear for themselves, but fear for their loved ones that are also in the house. And in this situation involved the kids, which, like is a weakness of mine. It just like breaks my heart to think like she was scared for herself, but also like her kid was in the closet while all of this was happening. Every decision Priscilla made during these moments with Daniel would have been shaped by her knowing that her kids were somewhere else in the house. After the assaults, Daniel murdered Priscilla by shooting her at close range. Evidence showed that a pillow was used in an attempt to muffle the sound of the gunshots, which prosecutors used later, this detail, to demonstrate that Daniel was aware and it was intended, because it suggested that Daniel made efforts to avoid detection rather than just shooting her without, trying to muffling the noise. Priscilla died inside of her own home that she had expected to return home, safely to that day. But unfortunately, the tragedy did not end there. At some point after Priscilla was killed, Abigail, her oldest daughter, who was 7 years old, returned home from school. Somewhere between leaving for school that morning and returning home, her mother had been murdered, her brother was trapped inside of a closet, and the safety of her family had already been destroyed. The ordinary routine of a school day separated the beginning and end of Abigail's life. Investigators later determined that both children were eventually murdered inside their own home as well. The deaths occurred in separate areas of the residence, and evidence showed that Daniel remained in control of the situation long enough to move throughout the house after Priscilla's murder. One of the reasons this case affected people so deeply throughout Massachusetts was because of the age of the victims. William was 5 and Abigail was 7. The public, even to this day, can easily picture children at those ages because it's just like a normal childhood age, like you're elementary school, living in a normal house, normal family. Nothing about their lives suggested they were ever going to become victims. So when Daniel finally left the Gustafson residence, he left behind a crime scene that investigators would end up spending an outrageous amount of time trying to reconstruct. The house itself became a map of sequence of events, and detectives had to determine where each victim had been, how did they arrive home, how long was Daniel inside the house, how did the crimes unfold, because every room became part of the investigation and every movement that Daniel did mattered. The person who would ultimately discover the aftermath, unfortunately, was their dad, Andrew. And I think about sometimes true crime stories focus so heavily on offenders like Daniel, like I'm doing right now, that surviving family members almost get forgotten about. But it's impossible to discuss this case without thinking about Daddy Andrew, because he left that house that morning with a wife, 2 kids, one on the way, went to work. By the time he returned home, all of them had been murdered. They had all been shot. There are very few experiences imaginable that compare to the shock of walking in and finding your entire family killed. I don't know how that would be comparable to anything else, So investigators and reporters can describe crime scenes, evidence, and timelines, but there's no full way to capture what that moment must have felt like for Andrew and for him to have to call the cops. The discovery of the Gustafson murders triggered a huge investigation pretty much immediately. Detectives began interviewing neighbors, reconstructing timelines, and examining as many suspects as possible. It did not take long at all before the attention turned to Daniel LaPlante, particularly because of his experience and history of the burglaries locally. And after what happened to the Tina Bowen family, he was the next person. The fact that his name surfaced so quickly is significant because it demonstrates how unusual his behavior had been that people immediately thought it was him. They weren't starting from scratch, the investigators and the police. Daniel himself had already attracted so much attention through the Bowen incident that police were very quick to look into him. But when they started closing in on him, Daniel was no longer like a troubled teen, connected to a bizarre stalking case. At this point, they believed they were dealing with the person responsible for the murders of a pregnant woman and her two kids. And so urgency surrounding the search changed instantly. Every hour that Daniel remained free created another opportunity for him to potentially do something maybe even more violent. So the community, which had already been shaken by the Bowen incident, was now confronted with the realization that this teenager who had been released might have also been responsible for this. What's interesting is when you go back through reports from this time, it's how quickly Daniel had transformed from like a local suspect into the subject of an intense police, like public attention. The boy in the wall story had already spread throughout Massachusetts. Even before the murders, people knew his name. Like it was huge. When the Gustafson murders happened, suddenly all of those earlier stories about the Bowen family had this like darker significance because what if this had happened to the Bowen family too? If I was Tina and her family, I would have been like, oh my God, this could have been us.
100%.
Yeah. And so I'd be like, I don't know if that's almost a relief that, like, thank God it wasn't us, or even more scarier thinking this could have been
More
us,
scary.
maybe. Yeah. More scary.
Yeah.
So obviously, the police pressure increased and Daniel fled because that's what he does. The manhunt that followed contributed enormously to the mythology surrounding this case because it seems like Daniel almost had this ability to disappear in places where he wasn't supposed to be and where people wouldn't automatically think he was. But that being said, guess where Daniel fled to? The woods behind the Bowen family house again. Like, I don't know if this was like an idiotic moment, but they literally found him in the exact same spot that they had found him before.
It's all he knows. That's his home.
Isn't that creepy though? Like, if I was the
Yeah.
Bowen family, I'd have been like, he was here to kill us today. So obviously, they took Daniel into custody, which ended the immediate threat, but began a much longer process of understanding exactly what happened. Every statement, every piece of physical evidence, every witness became very important. One aspect of the case becomes increasingly fascinating as you read through court documents is how heavily prosecutors focused on Daniel's decision making. I've talked about it, but again and again, they returned to these moments where Daniel could have chosen a different outcome and he chose not to. Like he could have fled the house. Before confronting Priscilla, he thought about leaving. And then that suggests that Daniel had prepped basically before this burglary. Like he brought weapons with him. This wasn't simply just the prosecution trying to prove guilt, it was them trying to establish that there was intent and demonstrating that Daniel had his actions reflected these choices that he was conscious in making rather than just like an outburst of a single moment. Meanwhile, on the opposite end, the defense team faced this difficult challenge because really there's no realistic dispute of like what happened. We know what happened. Instead, most of their focus on the defense side shifted towards like Daniel's mental state, his childhood, the severe abuse he claimed to experience growing up. From a psychological standpoint, it makes sense. I mean, Daniel's background was real shitty. His childhood was horrible, and not stable, violent, physical and sexual abuse. And some experts believe that these experiences played a huge role in shaping Daniel's development and emotions growing up because he was only 17 years old. Like his frontal lobe isn't all the way there. Not that it would ever all be all the way there, but like others acknowledge that trauma and also arguing that that doesn't give him the excuse of the specific natures of his crimes. Like that's kind of like a hard thing to. There's a line. Was Daniel's childhood fucked up and maybe he was fucked up? Yes. But does that condone what he did? Never. It should never condone what they did, but there's a reason he's messed up.
It's a contributing factor to what happened, not an excuse.
That's a
Yes.
great way to put it, Kylie. So, one detail that has fascinated researchers for decades now involved the relationship between Daniel's fantasy life and his criminal behavior. Many offenders like Daniel fantasized before they acted. They thought about what they were going to be doing. But in Daniel's case, investigators and psychologists frequently noted that there was this gap between reality and the way that Daniel seemed to experience reality. which doesn't explain the murders, but it does provide context for understanding like how someone could eventually just lose grasp of their lack of boundaries or be able to separate what was normal and what wasn't normal. The dude was living in someone's walls. Like, that's not normal, but to Daniel, he didn't see that as being bad, you know? So, like, there was something there that was wrong mentally, obviously. As the trial progressed, jurors were presented with evidence that forced them to like understand and reconstruct the final day of the Gustafson family's lives. For the jurors in Daniel LaPlante's trial, that meant confronting not only the murders themselves, but also the larger pattern that came before them. You know, the Tina Bowen family, the stalking, the hiding spaces, escalating behavior, and then most importantly, the victims. Priscilla had been remembered not simply as a victim, but as a teacher, a wife, a mother, an expecting parent again. Abigail and William were remembered as children with personalities, routines, friends, futures. They were babies. One of the most powerful aspects of victim testimony in cases like this is it reminds the jurors that they're not just like evaluating a crime, they're evaluating the destruction of actual human lives. And it didn't take the jury very long to come to conclusion. So when the verdict came, Daniel was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder, ensuring that the remainder of his life would be defined by what happened inside the Gustafson home. Daniel was sentenced to serve 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But surprisingly, this wasn't the end of the story because in many ways, it was just the beginning of this decades-long debate, which you could see, if you look up this case, you'll see online, this happened in the 80s, but like, you'll see how it transformed to topics today because we're now talking about like juvenile offenders, rehabilitation, psychological trauma, and whether someone who commits a crime at 17 years old can ever truly change. You know, like the dude wasn't in his 40s and we're like, lock him up for life. That debate ended up following Daniel LaPlante all the way through childhood and resurfacing again and again as courts, psychologists, parole boards, victim families, and the public struggled with the same question. What exactly should society do with someone like Daniel LaPlante? Well, one of the reasons that the parole hearings decades later became so contentious was because they forced everyone to revisit those unanswered questions. When Daniel committed the murders, he was under the age of 18, and at the time, many states, including Massachusetts, treated certain juvenile murderers extremely harshly. However, over the years, attitudes towards juvenile sentencing began to change. There were advances that we know, in neuroscience that led courts to recognize that adolescent brains, like a 17-year-old, are different from adult brains in many important ways. Research showed that teenagers generally possess poorer impulse control, weaker risk assessment, and greater susceptibility to outside influences than fully mature adults. So, as a result of this, several major court decisions across the US changed the legal landscape for juvenile offenders. Suddenly, these individuals who had spent decades in prison for crimes committed when they were teenagers were now receiving new hearings, new reviews, and new opportunities to argue for release. Daniel LaPlante was one of them. There were 2 truths that people kind of went on this. The first one was that Daniel committed these crimes. They were horrible, so horrific that many people believed he should never experience his freedom again. And then the other half of people were thinking that this person sitting in front of parole boards decades later, he was no longer that 17-year-old who committed those crimes. He was now a middle-aged man who spent most of his life incarcerated. And that was a challenge because people had to determine the distinction between the two. We had evaluations, prison records, psychological assessments. Officials at parole boards examined disciplinary histories. Supporters of continued incarceration pointed to the severity of Daniel's crimes. He murdered 3 people, including children. And they argued that some of those acts should never allow him to be released again. Others focused on the fact that Daniel was a baby himself when all of this happened and could he be rehabilitated? After many hearings, because Daniel was only 17 at the time of the killings, the court ruled that juvenile criminals like Daniel could not automatically be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. So in 2017, Daniel was resentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole after 45 years. That means Daniel has to serve at least 45 years before he can even be eligible for parole. And since Daniel was convicted in 1988, his first parole eligibility is expected to be around 2032, 2033. And Daniel will be 62 years old. And so, after years of terrorizing families, stalking young girls, hiding inside homes, and ultimately carrying out horrible family murders, Daniel LaPlante has disappeared now behind prison walls. But unlike many of the cases we cover, this story doesn't just end with like a neat sense of justice or closure. Priscilla Gustafson never got to watch her children grow up. Abigail never got the chance to become a teenager. Little William never got to experience a single day beyond kindergarten. An entire family was erased in the matter of minutes by a 17-year-old whose escalating behavior had terrified people for years before anyone truly stopped him. Today, Daniel remains incarcerated, serving multiple life sentences, waiting for his chance of freedom. Whether that day ever comes is a decision for a parole board, but for the surviving members of Tina Bowen's family and the Gustafson family, his sentence has never really ended. They've spent decades of carrying the weight of what happened inside that Townsend home on December 1st, 1987. And that is the story of Daniel LaPlante.
That one gave me the heebie-jeebies.
I'm interested in the psychology behind why he wanted to hide in the walls and then attacked them. Like, did he want to be part of a family so bad and he like a
Right.
normal family and he was jealous and then killed him? Like what? Yeah.
But like even then, like where did the idea of hiding in a wall become available for him? Like why not stalk them outside of their home?
He like feels like he has to be in it. Like he wants to be in their family or something.
But the walls.
It kind of reminds me, I think it's called The Voyeur or something, this documentary. This guy owned like a motel and he had it like specially fitted to where he was like crawling up like in the attic of it and he was just a peeping Tom and he'd watch people get naked and stuff and get off on it.
It's
Well,
weird.
and obviously there was like a sexual aspect to the crime as well, since he committed the rape too.
Yeah.
So that's just, I don't know, that's so weird.
Okay, sexual pervert, all that premeditation. Not saying you can't be rehabilitated, but I would think that's very unlikely. Like, we're not talking about like a 17-year-old that got like wrapped up in a gang and like has a bad home life. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. There's some
I
rehabilitations that cannot happen.
I am troubled by this case because like you have to okay, he was 17 when all this happened. He had a fucked up childhood. Sure. Is he probably not good towards society? Yes. Should he be in prison for his entire fucking life? I don't know. Like that's just I would almost rather him be in a home, not someone's home, not pun intended or in the walls, but like almost in a I love a good mental institution if they're done correctly and they're not, leaving their naked children on the floor screaming in corners of feces. But like, I don't think someone like Daniel LaPlante should necessarily, I think there could have been or can be mental rehabilitations so that he can act in society, but maybe under watchful eye kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. If he's rehabilitated, he needs to still be in a mental institution because you've killed someone. You've killed an entire family. There's no
Right.
way you can't ever be in society again, in my opinion.
See, I don't know. He was a child. Like, he wasn't fully there. I think he has mental health issues regardless. Like, I think, and if you dig into his background of like the psych stuff on him, I think he also was mentally challenged. And so mixing that, I'm not saying that he should just be living on his own, released with society, but like maybe in a special home with guidelines. Like he can't leave the house without somebody else, kind of thing, or something.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there could be like there's like would have to be he would
Heavy
have to
restraint.
basically be in a home like under
Right.
surveillance like constantly for me to ever be okay with him not being in prison. And I'm not okay with people with mental disabilities or mental problems to be in prison. But at the
That's what I
same
struggle
time,
with.
yeah.
Is that if he does have, let's, because I'm self-diagnosing him, like if he does have mental health issues to that extent where he's mentally challenged, I don't think he should be in prison. I think he should be in some type of medical helping thing. Because,
Yeah.
getting help in prison. In
Yeah,
fact,
no,
he's not dead,
absolutely.
like, which
Absolutely, but
is
you've killed a whole family. There's no
right.
way that you can go to Walmart by yourself. That's the kind of crimes that we're like, whoa, why did he get out, you know?
Yeah.
Why is he walking around in society? But yeah, I totally agree with you, actually.
Mental health matters.
Guys, this was a case for our friends at Forensic Friday.
It is. If you haven't, not to plug them or anything, good job, Holly.
But
If,
actually, yeah, to plug
but
them.
actually, yeah, if you ever want to listen to another podcast that's not ours, they're called Forensic Fridays, and it's two girls that we absolutely love, and they both work in the forensic, psych kind of fields. Wonderful human beings, and they talk about some really fascinating things.
One of them, I don't know which one because I'm bad with names, but they just released a book which seems super interesting. I'm gonna try to read it, get it and read it. I don't know if it's for sale yet, but it's on like psychopaths, I'm pretty sure, and it looks pretty interesting.
I didn't know that. That's so, I'll definitely buy it. So listen to our friends. Do you guys want to jump into overtime?
Let's do it.
Okay, question for you, girly swirlies. First of all, I heard last week's case was wonderful. I had multiple people reach out to
Mm-hmm.
me, Kylie, that
Oh,
said
that's
clap, clap.
Yeah.
sweet. Thanks.
Yes.
Round of applause.
I didn't listen to overtime, so I don't know if you guys went over the subject, but
Wait, did you listen to the case?
no, not at all.
Okay, she's like, I didn't listen to Overtime. It's like Kate does not listen to the podcast. If you are new here, she doesn't know what we sound like. She doesn't know anything.
When do we have time? Like, when do I have time to listen to a pod? Okay, give me a break. I'll listen. I have a 40-minute drive today, so I'm going to listen to your voices. I just don't like listening to mine.
No, I get that actually. I do get that. If I didn't have to edit audio, I would not listen to my
All
own.
right.
I'd probably listen to y'all's, but I wouldn't listen to my own voice, like my own episodes.
You know what's the best days ever is when we record and record my episode and then I immediately have to edit it right after.
Horrible. Horrible.
And like I already have the script memorized. It's,
I need to
yeah,
do it again.
nauseating.
Thank God I have kids and have an excuse to not have to do that.
You know what? I'm gonna have kids just so I don't have to edit anymore.
Okay, sounds good. And then it's Holly's turn. She's got to do
Oh
everything.
God. Yeah, no, hey, wait, I'll have a kid just
Wait, wait.
Hey, hold
Um,
on.
okay,
No.
wait. So this topic has been on my mind because we talked about it like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then we never got to actually talk about it, is things that are overrated and underrated.
You know what's so funny is that we did this for overtime last week.
I hate you.
And
No,
if you
you
would have
didn't.
listened to it, you would have known. Like honestly, I get you don't listen, but then there's like sometimes where she's like, "Oh, Kate or Kylie and I will say something about the episodes or like just over my dead pod in general," and Kate will be like, "Well, I don't listen," so I'm like, "You don't even know what we're doing here."
I know. Well, you know what? Screw you guys. I'm gonna go over my list. It's my episode.
Honestly, that's
Yeah.
probably better because I'm sure yours is way longer than our two
You
combined.
you told me that I wasn't allowed to have long things, so I narrowed it
Okay.
down to like a few.
You got
Okay.
three, yeah.
Okay. Well, I have more than three, but
Okay.
it's a short list. Okay. Things and look, I just want to say this before I get started, you guys, to you too, Holly and Kylie, and to everyone listening. If I offend you, I'm sorry. I also don't really care that much. So this
Yeah,
is
we're
going to,
all so stupid. You can offend, like
yeah.
we should be offended most of the time. Most of the things that they say, I'm like, wait, that's my favorite thing. So if
Well,
we offend you, look.
Kylie's about to be offended right off the bat.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, well that's
yeah. Something I find overrated, cruises.
You've never even been on one.
Nope, and I find them overrated.
girl. Hey, can I say something?
Okay, I thought the same thing. I thought I was gonna hate it. We just booked another one.
I 50-50 agree.
Like I just don't I think that like you're gonna be trapped. You're telling me let's go out into the middle of the ocean where you can't survive if the boat crashes and Titanic happens, okay? You're not surviving. And then also you're stuck with other people. Have we not heard about the poop gate? Did we not just have something that brought in a virus that's never been existed before?
Uh,
No.
Okay, I mean, you drive your car every single day. The odds of you getting into a car accident and dying are way higher than you dying on a cruise ship.
but it could happen.
Anything could happen.
I think that cruises can be done right. Like I think that there's probably like some really cool cruises that don't have as many people. My problem is the amount of people. I'm like,
Amount of people.
You gotta, there's smaller ships. You can,
that's what I'm
yeah.
saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think
Or
I think it can be really nice.
the fact that there's rooms that don't have windows.
We did that last time. I will say, best sleep of my life.
No, hard pass. Hard
I
pass.
stayed in one of those airport lounge situations where it's like the sleep, like you can just you check in and you just sleep in your layover or whatever, no window, and it made me feel claustrophobic. But it was also like a room with a bed slipped in it. And it was like there's no room to walk around. And I felt like I'm in a cruise ship.
Like a tanning bed, and there being a fear that the tanning bed won't open, and then you're gonna fry to death.
I'm just a germs person too. Yes, that. I'm a germs person, and I just feel like I'm also like so close to people. And I have fear of vomiting, if you don't know. It's like maybe Forensic Fridays can help me with that as well. It's vomiting fear, like, and you put me on a cruise ship where you don't know if there's going to be a storm. Also have anxiety. We can talk about all of this later, but
He needs better medication.
yeah, but and then the food, that's like a big thing on
Ugh.
cruise ships is like the neurovirus going around because everybody's touching the same things and like one person gets the stomach virus and then everybody I'm like I've done a lot of research. I'm gonna stop. Okay.
Anyways, overrated cruises. Okay, next one. And this kind of is a dig to myself because I'm gonna stop doing it because it's stupid. Party favors of any kind.
Oh, I disagree.
Give me a party favor that's useful that I'm gonna
No,
use again.
no, I got a party favor last night. I went to a birthday party. Shout out Bradley, happy birthday. And I got a party favor. It was candy. Loved it.
Okay, that's great. But like, don't give me candy covered nuts. Like, come on. I don't want the almonds, all right?
I got good candy in mine.
Okay, good. But like any other party favors, I'm like, the bubbles, sure, I have a kid now, but like,
We're going to different parties. That's the problem. You're getting
we are
bubbles.
going to
I'm getting
different.
like, candy and little alcohol bottles. I'm telling,
Okay, another one. Overrated. Elf on the Shelf. I don't understand it. Not gonna do it. Say hi. Overrated. Florida. More specifically, Florida in the summer.
dude, yeah, what's wrong with y'all? Kylie's a
Like,
lizard. So that tracks.
When we went to Arizona, I was very tempted to like Instacart a humidifier to the room.
yeah.
Kylie loves the heat, humidity. She likes that.
Y'all,
Yeah.
it's like 90% humidity. I'm still running my humidifier at night.
Christy's like you. Y'all are like, I don't know.
I got a steam.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next. And I'm really sorry to all my friends listening to this. I love Disney. Overrated Disney adults.
Every time we have to like an overtime where we list things, Disney Adults comes up.
It doesn't matter what the topic is, it's Disney adults.
I want to go to Disney because I haven't been since I was 4. I've only been once. So like I kind of don't even know if I
That's
agree with it
fine.
or not.
But we're not, that's fine. I
Mhm.
would love to go to Disney, but we're not dressing up as characters and going to Disney.
And you're not going like
That makes
on your
sense.
free in your free time every moment you have.
Yeah.
But there's
That's
some people that love that. Yeah.
And that's fine. That's fine. But I think it's overrated. Okay. Underrated. These are good ones. Underrated. When you flip your pillow over in the middle of the night and it's cold.
Yes.
Watching TV with subtitles on.
I hate that. I hate that.
What?
It's so distracting and the subtitles like they're ahead of like what they're actually saying and I'm reading it before they're saying it.
I have to have TV with subtitles.
Same. I mean, well, I don't have to, but if a lot of times I prefer it.
My brain cannot process watching something. It's like they can talk and I don't know what they're saying. I have to read it.
Okay, just read a book.
Okay. Irish goodbyes.
Yes, girl.
Love them.
Love an Irish goodbye.
Yeah.
More importantly, my last thing that is underrated is when you cancel plans and all the people involved secretly wanted to cancel the plans.
Oh, that's the best. I love when people do that.
And you're like, thank God I didn't want to go anyways. And then you guys mutually are like, yay, we both didn't want to go.
If you invite, other than you guys, actually, because I never get to see y'all in person, but like if anyone else in my life invites me to do something, I'm hoping you cancel. I'm praying you cancel.
I'll never be mad at someone for canceling plans
Unless I'm like
unless I'm
already
on the
like,
way.
yeah, I'm makeup done, I'm dressed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, if my makeup's done and you cancel, I don't like you.
I'm going out, I'm going somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I'm going back. I'm washing my face and going to bed. I'm happy to do so.
I
I
feel
have
like
been
I
in the car pulling out of my driveway and someone's candles are playing and I turn my ass back around.
I feel like I've like wasted makeup. I'm like, all right, someone's got to see it. Even though I just go to Starbucks real quick.
Yeah, yeah. Like someone will see me.
Just go through the drive-through. Can you tell
Sometimes
me
I
I
do
look
that. I
pretty?
get home and I still have my makeup done and it still looks good. And I'm like, dang,
No one saw me today.
no one saw me. Now I gotta go find someone to see me. Go down to the 7-Eleven and get a compliment. Fuck.
The bodega. Let's go to the bodega.
We don't call them bodegas here. We call them gas
So,
stations.
gas stations.
A
Well,
filler.
depending on where you are in Florida, it's a gas station or it's a bodega.
I
So,
love this. I love bodega. That's so much of a better word than gas
but
station.
see, I feel like in Arkansas, you can't be like, I'm going to the bodega.
No,
Oh,
you're going to the quick trip.
yeah. If
Yeah,
you said bodega, you'd get beat up.
you would get picked up.
Yeah.
You would go missing.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning over. Thank you guys for tuning in for another episode of Over My Dead Pod. For more information about this case specifically, you can check us out at overmydeadpod.com or on our social media websites at overmydeadpod. Also, make sure to check out our friends at Forensic Friday. They have a great podcast as well, and we love them. And we will see you guys next week for another episode. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.